Our guests today are Jim Moloney and Ed Ricchiuto. Jim is a partner of Gibson Dunn out in Orange County, California. He worked on the staff at the SEC with me back in the day. He worked in the Office of Mergers and Acquisitions, was the primary draftsperson for Reg MA. Ed Ricchiuto worked with me even before that at the SEC. We've known each other over 30 years. He just recently retired from Sidley in Austin. He's in New York City. And he's always up for a challenge. We're going to talk about debt tender offers, the definitive guide. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Ed and Jim, my longest friends, SEC types. We're going to talk about debt tender offers. We have the experts in this area. Ed, I'm going to kick it to you to start us off on the tender offer regulations. What are those all about?
Hey, Brock, good to see you all. The first thing I want to do is sort of narrow the scope of what we are going to be talking about. We're going to focus on tender offers for non-convertible debt securities. Convertible debt securities and other equity securities would, I think, require an additional podcast because of additional rules and regulations applicable. And it's really a question of, when an issuer decides that wants to repurchase some of its, non-convertible debt securities, how does it go about setting up the structure and determining how it wants to engage in that repurchase? People often, will think of other opportunities of purchasing their securities by means of privately negotiated transactions or at the market transactions, but Jim and I are going to stay focused on, those transactions that do fit within the definition of a tender offer.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, I would say this comes up in a lot of different contexts, Brock. Ed and I are on the outside, we'll have clients call, and it might be that the maturity dates are coming up and they just want to kick out the maturity date. Interest rates may be fluctuating very significantly. Some of the debt covenants they have may not be convenient for whatever transactions they want to undertake. So there's many, many different situations. And you also see a big spurt of these refinancings, restructurings in difficult times. I think we saw it at the beginning of COVID. We saw it back in 07 and 08. So I just wanted to lay some of the landscape that there's just many different reasons that would push a company, an issuer to look to refinance or restructure its debt.
And one of the first questions that we have to address in connection with that is whether the particular repurchase is or is not a tender offer, and the SEC has never defined what is a tender offer, although I do believe that they made an effort back in the 80s. So you need to walk through the SEC or the Wellman test that. It's an 8-factor facts and circumstances test that you need to walk through and determine, if after the analysis of what you're looking to do and the time period over which you're looking to do it, you come out on the side that, we think this is, or more likely than not, is a tender offer, and therefore we need to comply with certain rules and regulations under, Section 14E and Regulation 14E. Of the 34 Act. I can go through the 8-factor test with you. It's a test that again is a facts and circumstances test, and there's no 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5. You really sort of do need to look at the totality of the situation to decide whether or not you are engaged in a tender offer. And again, the 8 factors are, whether there's an active and widespread solicitation of security holders, whether the solicitation is for a substantial percentage of the issuer's securities, whether the offer is made at a premium over prevailing market price, whether the terms of the offer are firm rather than negotiable, whether the offer is contingent upon the tender of a fixed minimum number of securities, or subject to a fixed maximum number of securities to be purchased, whether the offer is open only for a limited period of time, whether the security holders are pressured to respond and sell into the offer, and finally, whether public announcement of a purchasing program concerning the target issuer precede or accompany a rapid accumulation of large amounts of the target issuer's securities. So you need to sort of go through that analysis based on what you're looking to do, the time period you're looking to do it over, and decide whether or not you do have a tender offer. And again, we're going to assume that you've made that initial determination that it is a tender offer. So now the question is, what rules and regulations do you need to concern yourself with?
Yeah, I think I would say, yeah, that Wellman case is sort of the key case where the factors came from, Southern District of New York, 1979, and the courts have been applying it ever since, and the SEC has embraced it. And the one good case that came after that, I think, was Hansen in 85, which basically said, as Ed said earlier, you look at the totality of the circumstances. So it's not any one factor. It's sort of look and see how many factors. It's not a majority of factors. And I think the reason the courts and the SEC have left it loose like that is so that you could look at every situation and that this structure or framework for analysis can be used, and it doesn't get outdated, that it can be applied under different facts and circumstances.
So once you make the determination, you looked, I think, to Section 14E and Regulation 14E under the 34 Act, which are intended to prevent practices that might be deemed fraudulent or manipulative in connection with the buyback. Regulation 14E sets out certain specific requirements. They're really structuring requirements that need to be complied with if you are doing a tender offer. Again, I'm not going to get into laying out all of the factors. I think they're fairly apparent on their face once you take a look at Regulation 14E. Again, it doesn't require any specific filings. Doesn't require any specific disclosure. You've always got 10b-5 lurking out there, so you do need to be concerned with when you're doing a tender offer document, making sure that you do have the appropriate information disclosure in there.
We should probably discuss a little bit about the typical structures. How many days are typically open? I think this goes all the way back to Lazard and the no action letters, where when you had investment grade debt, you could shorten the period and you could do a lot of interesting things. We won't go into that much detail because we'll be talking about a no action letter shortly that the SEC put out in 2015, which sort of changed the rules on debt tender offers. But I think, Ed, why don't you talk about some of the time periods and the typical structures that we see today?
Yeah, sure. The structures that we I've seen most often are dictated by what the issuer is looking to do in connection with the overall transaction. Sometimes we see any and all offers that are coupled with a consent solicitation, whereby an issuer is looking to strip out restrictive covenants from their indenture. Most of those transactions we see are structured as a 20 business day offer. If there is a consent attached, there's generally a separate consent fee paid for the consents, but that fee is generally only paid during the first 10 business days. So while you'll be doing an any and all offer, the price will drop down after business day 10, when the consent payment goes away. I think you find in those situations that anyone who's looking to participate in the offer will participate during the first 10 business days, although they're not restricted or prohibited from participating in the second 10 business days. In some situations where we see partial tender offers, so that the issuer is only looking to repurchase a certain dollar amount or certain principal amount of outstanding securities, we'll often also see a 20 business day offer where the issuer offers a price, and it could be either a fixed price or a price based on a formula. And then after the first 10 business days, there's a drop down in the price, so that, again, holders who are participating in the offer are incentivized to come in during the first 10 business days And, this way the issuer has a certain degree of certainty as to where it is in the process. If it needs to extend the period or make certain adjustments, it's got the second 10 business days to do that during. And then, as Jim was, alluding to, there was a no action letter that came out back in 2015, which, provided a lot of relief in the context of any and all offers for non-convertible debt securities that allowed an issuer to do an offer, a tender offer, in as few as 5 business days.
Yeah. Now, this was earth shattering because remember, historically, 14E, 20 business days. And then the SEC sort of got comfortable with, as Ed was saying, the 10/20, right? You can have an early tender fee or a consent fee paid on the 10th day, and then the price drops, and the latter half of the tender offer is pretty much dead. No one's going to tender at the lower price. So you've shortened the period to 10 business days effectively. With the 5 business day, this really came about sort of a confluence of factors. There was the institutional investors who felt like they were missing some of these debt tender offers. They weren't getting the opportunity to participate. They were happening too quick. A lot of big meetings. Ed, myself, and others went to DC, big roundtable, division directors, SEC commissioners there, Council of Institutional Investors pushing for the SEC to fix this. SEC nodded their head and said, okay, why don't you guys submit a no action letter? The bar, Ed, myself, and many others worked as a group on a letter. I believe Cahill was the one that spearheaded it. They definitely put in the lion's share of the work on the letter, many drafts back and forth. And it was a give and take between the SEC staff and the outside bar and institutional investors. And some of the things that came about was when you commence, you have to put out a press release. It has to be before 10 a.m. You have to file an 8K. It has to be before noon. So all of these things you would have to do were basically to make sure that people got notice. You had to give withdrawal rights. There had to be notice of guaranteed delivery. A lot of requirements and then some restrictions. As Ed mentioned, you can't have it for convertible debt. You can't have a consent solicitation. You can't be stripping covenants, things of that sort. The first couple of years, I think we were monitoring these. We were doing surveys every year, 20 or 30 of them per year, not really well accepted by the marketplace. For some reason, the restrictions and the things that would tie your hands prevented it from being fully used. But as time passed, the letter was 2015, probably 2 to 3 years into it, we started to see an uptick. And in the last year, I would say, we're into the over 100, maybe 200 on these 5 business day abbreviated debt tender offers.
Right. And this was a big departure from prior practice because, while prior to this letter, there had been a series of other no action letters that allowed you to do cash tender offers for investment grade securities in, I think, what was Jim, 7 to 10 calendar days. This opened it up to both, investment grade and non-investment grade securities, and also, opened it up to exchange offers, which prior to this letter had to be kept open for a full 20 business days. And again, well, I agree with Jim that there was a reluctance to sort of, be the first ones out there to rely on this letter. We saw a lot more reluctance on people wanting to do the exchange offers. The cash tender offers sort of trickled in first, and then the exchange offers. But now I think they're both well accepted approaches on how to do these transactions and do them relatively quickly.
Yeah, we see we've seen and worked on ones where they'll do a 5 business day offer for one series or 2, and then follow that up by a standard 10/20 day. And a lot of these things we should mention. The timing, you'd say, well, why is it important? As Ed mentioned earlier, 10b-5 applies. You might be coming up into a blackout period, might be close to the end of the quarter. There might be other events. You might be getting close to bankruptcy. You may have a need to move quickly to sort of restructure, refinance your debt. So the number of days that an offer is open can be very critical. So the marketplace is constantly looking for a time period that will accommodate the business needs of the issuer.
And the 10/10 sort of got us there, but the 5 business day offer really, took us to the next step. Again, the no action letter has a lot of specific requirements and conditions that need to be met, and you need to be very, very careful that if you're going to be relying on the letter, you look at all those conditions and make sure that you're spot on all of them, because failure to comply with any one of the conditions takes you outside the scope of the no action letter, and could potentially result in violating the tender offer rules. I don't think we need to go through. I think there were 13 or 14 requirements in the no action letter. The date of the no action letter was January 23, 2015, and I think it's something that anyone considering doing a tender offer should take a read through.
Yeah, there's a good summary and a timeline. We did. I think it's published, Brock, in your old Deal Lawyers. We did several articles on it when the letter first came out, and everything from the conditions to the timelines to the the do not do's. So it's becoming much more accepted these days. But keep in mind, you're going to be, if there's a dealer manager, you're going to be giving a legal opinion, and so you're going to want to make sure that those conditions, as Ed said, are fully complied with. You sometimes see some people pushing edges around the envelope, and it's an interesting area to try to always make sure that your fact pattern fits in the no action letter, because since 2015, the staff hasn't really looked back at this. They haven't given any more letters. It's just it seems to be working. So they haven't really stuck the camel's nose under the tent to see how the engine's running. But I think Ed would probably agree they've been working pretty well.
Yeah. Jim, there was one clarification that came out from the staff after the no action letter, if I recall, and I don't have the site on me, but I think it's, it gets into certain points regarding conditionality and some other, finer points that you also want to look at in connection with the offer.
I think they touched upon foreign issuers as well. Yep.
Right. And going to Jim's point on the opinions, the opinion practice in connection with 14E is a little bit different than the opinion practice in a lot of other areas. And again, I'll just point people to there's a very good article in the Business Lawyer back in fall of 2017 on 14E opinions for debt tender offers. That I think is also worth pursuing or perusing in connection with a debt tender.
And then, Jim, what about the current SEC staff views on lockups and consents in this area?
Yeah, this has been an area of fertile comment by the staff. I think part of the problem, what I alluded to earlier, was sometimes you need to move quickly. It's just the nature of the markets, interest rate volatility, and other major events coming up. And before you go put pen to paper and spend a lot of time drafting documents and retaining dealer managers and dealer manager agreements, you want to sort of know that this is going to be a success, that this transaction is going to work. Otherwise, we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time to do something where the clock is ticking. And if the investors, if the note holders are not going to accept the terms, well, then you've just wasted a lot of time and money, and now you've burned down time on the clock. So it's not uncommon for issuers and their advisors, usually the financial advisor, to reach out to a handful of the larger note holders to test the waters and see if they would be interested in participating in a debt tender offer, an exchange offer. And in doing so, if they're on board, you might want to lock them up, i.e. get them to agree to participate in the tender offer so that you have some relative assurance or comfort that all of this is not for naught. When you do that, the question always creeps in, am I engaged in a creeping tender offer, right? If I've approached 5, 10, 15, 20 holders and they're significant and I'm locking them up, have I now made the tender offer and have I not complied with the tender offer rules? And so the SEC has always been, and the staff has always been, keeping a watchful eye on this. And depending on whether it's an all cash offer or an exchange offer, you might have to worry about, Section 5, and do you have an exemption? If it's convertible debt, as Ed mentioned earlier, that's outside the scope of this vid. But I would say you have to worry about 13E4 with the converts. So there's just a lot of issues you need to be thinking about. Now, as Ed will tell you, every firm, every investment bank has sort of a different rule of thumb. I don't think my firm has a rule of thumb, but I'll throw one out. I heard Wall Street bankers would say, if you buy, 25% of a class of series of notes in one quarter, or up to 50% in any 12-month period, so that's a rolling 1-year basis, you should probably pick up the phone and call a lawyer and have someone like Ed walk you through the Wellman factors and do some analysis as to whether this is a tender offer in and of itself before we even get the rocket off the launch pad. But any other thoughts you have, Ed, on like rules of thumb, speed bumps?
Yeah, I've always tried to stay away from sort of the bright line discussions here, which sometimes the bankers don't want to hear, but I think you really do need to, again, look at the totality of the circumstances and see, how widely held, are the securities, how much do you think you can get by, and again, I think it's an incremental analysis. If I've had to advise clients in connection with this, it's, let's test the water with a smaller group, see if we get there, and then if we have to extend out to a larger group, we can go there. But I think the lawyer involvement is important. Before you get there, I've heard some firms talk about the 10% rule, some talk about 25% rule. Again, I think if you ask the SEC, they'll tell you there is no rule, and you just need to be cautious about what you're doing there.
So when there's no rule and you have clients calling and banks and everybody scrambling around, sometimes you need to, come up with sort of what would be center of the fairway. And kind of in part what we did a few years back, 07, 08, the recession, when there was a big push to refinance debt, a lot of companies going into bankruptcy. And again, it resurfaced at the beginning of COVID, March 2020. There was another big push for a lot of debt refinancing transactions. You had to come up with some sort of, how many people could you approach realistically in a normal situation? And we looked at, over the years, and I'm talking decades, of comment letters to companies who locked up or got agreements to tender from a decent number of holders, because the staff always comes back 2020 and does this scratch and sniff test to see if that passes muster. And so we had a whole spreadsheet. We looked over decades of comments. We looked at the case law. We had extensive discussions with people on the staff at ABA meetings around the country on this topic over the years. And we eventually distilled at least some guidance, some helpful guidance that I think most practitioners have now adopted. This guidance is set forth in a Deal Lawyers article, Brock, that we did, I think, in September, October 2009, on lockups, on convertible debt, straight debt, agreements to tender exchange. And in there, I think it's footnote 11, we talk about, maybe up to 10 holders, and up to 80% of the class, if done in an appropriate fashion, i.e., you don't trip too many Wellman factors, you don't put out a press release, you don't put pressure on people. It's privately negotiated. Could you not borrow concepts from lockups and Reg MA in business combinations and say, look, we're approaching 5, 8, 10 of the largest holders of the class of notes. Certainly, if they don't want to do a deal, they're the ones driving the bus. It's not the issuer. They're not somehow threatened or pressured. And in that article, it's been out there now. It's 2009 to 10, 11, 12 years. The staff recently read it, called me about it, asked me about it, and I walked them through the analysis. And I basically said, look, it's been out there, and the market has pretty much moved to that, up to 10 holders, up to 80%. You sometimes get people pushing the envelope, some conservative and some more aggressive. But I think, as Ed would say, facts and circumstances, totality of the circumstances, the Hansen case, you really have to look and see what your fact pattern is. And that's where counsel comes in, who's done a lot of these, that can help you through the analysis.
Okay. And I suppose if you get to 100%, then, everybody's generally happy, and you don't have to worry about the discussion quite as much. So.
And I've seen, not that I've worked on any, but I have seen, because I monitor this, press releases where companies put out and said they locked up 100% and, refinanced the debt overnight. It's possible. I mean, if there were 5 of the largest, most sophisticated institutional investors, why couldn't they, swap out debt or agree to sell back to the issuer?
Yeah, when we've done the analysis, I think one of the first questions I try to get some color on is, who owns the securities, how widely are they held, and is there a very finite group that we can approach?
And then, Jim, what are waterfall debt tender offers?
Oh, one of the more exotic versions. We saved this for last, perhaps because it's the most interesting, and there's actually a rise, a surgence of waterfall debt tender offers. So you let's say you're a very large issuer and you have a certain amount of capital to spend to refinance your debt. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to spend all the time chasing one series and then find out people don't want to tender or sell. So they might have 7, 8, 9, 10 series of debt outstanding, different interest rates, different maturity dates. The issuer, along with its financial and legal advisors, will look at those multiple series of debt and prioritize them, which has the closest maturity date or the highest interest rate. We'll prioritize those. We'll put those at the top. And so the issuer would go out and say, we're purchasing or exchanging up to 5 billion, 8 billion, 10 billion worth of notes. For these 10 series of notes outstanding, they'll have a table on the cover page. They'll list them in order of priority. And then what will happen is the folks will tender. At the end of the tender, you'll look at what's been tendered to see, okay, how many of the first series has been tendered. And if it's, you can have subcaps. Each series could be any and all, or it could be up to a subcap within a series. And if it's not oversubscribed, if it's oversubscribed, there'll be proration. If it's undersubscribed and there's still capital left that was offered initially, it'll flow down to the subsequent series. And so you basically have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tender offers running concurrently. And they just operate like it's described as a waterfall. Ed, you've worked on a number of these. Any issues that you've spotted that can be tricky for the newcomer?
No, I think it's, one of the features you mentioned is one we sometimes see, but don't always see, subcaps. And as Jim said, sometimes the offer will be for 5 billion total of the 10 series, and you'll just sort of go down in priority until you've exhausted that amount. Sometimes there will be subcaps so that, you don't want to purchase any and all of a specific series, so you'll build in a subcap. So you only purchase up to a certain dollar amount or principal amount, and then you'll flow down to the next security. These are generally structured as, in my experience, 20 business day offers, because, there's a question of, is it an all offer or is it a partial tender offer? We have seen a variation on this recently, where there's no proration on this, on at least the last series in the priority list. It's an any or none structure, so that after you've exhausted the specific series, you flow down to the last one, and if for some reason you don't, or if you don't have enough left in your capital spend to purchase any and all of that particular series, then you purchase none. So it's considered an any and all offer with a condition. So I think people have gotten comfortable that they can use the abbreviated timeline in that structure.
That's right. As Ed mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the 5 business day, it has to be any or all to avoid the pressure. And then if you get to a particular series in the priority and there's not enough, I think they refer that to as leapfrogging. So if you have a series in the middle and there's not enough capital to accommodate those tendered in that level, it'll leapfrog over that series. So you might go from priority 6, skip over priority 7 and down to 8 to see if you can pick up there. It's all very interesting, and it can be, it doesn't, I mean, I've seen these with consent solicitations, early tender payments to try to get people in on the first 10 days. And so Wall Street and sophisticated counsel have really made these very exotic. The waterfalls are not the waterfalls of 10 or 20 years ago. These, I've seen them, you know, with the 5 business day, I've seen them with the 10/20, and it's all designed to most efficiently refinance debt in a short period of time. And I can't say that I've seen any harm or any injury. You know, I do think that the offers, the waterfalls I've seen do live up to the spirit of the no action letters that are out there that allow for this. So they seem to be working well.
Yeah, the market always seems to be looking for ways to, and there's a natural tendency, you know, tension. You got the tender offer rules that on their face require that the offer be kept open for a full 20 business days, which, you know, as Jim mentioned earlier, you know, raises a lot of practical concerns. So a lot of these structures have evolved over the years of trying to, you know, find a way to shrink that period down to something more acceptable from a business standpoint, without running afoul of the tender offer rules.
Yeah, everyone's always constantly keeping an eye on 14E and the 20 business day, because everything shorter than 20 business requires reliance on a no action letter or some comfort from the staff. And I will say that as Ed and I know, when you have to give the opinions on these things, you really have to look, you know, hard and closely at the structure to make sure you're going to be able to give the comfort that the structure and the framework you know, lives up both to the spirit and the letter of the letters and the no action letters and the guidance on debt tender offers.
Yeah, I mean, you often get the question, you know, well 10/10 is an accepted structure, so you can drop the price down after the 10th business day. Well, could you push that back to the 8th day, or, you know, even further back? And that's sort of where you get into the tension of, you know, how far can you push and still get you comfortable about issuing the appropriate opinions.
Well, I don't think we can, I mean, we could go on all day, Brock, but I mean, I think we've given a good primer, a good lay of the land, the landscape of debt tender offers for those that are thinking about engaging a banker and a lawyer and looking at refinancing or restructuring their debt.
Don't go chasing. Well, I guess you can chase waterfalls. It was great. Thanks. The definitive guide. And it's great to see you guys. It's great to see you guys.
Same here.
Thanks very much. It was awesome.
Thanks for having us, Brock.